Welcome back to Go Into Production. I'm Wael Robati, and I'm joined by David Diroff. In our last episode, David and I talked about the platform multiplication problem, how smart engineering teams end up with 5 different solutions to the same problem. But we only scratched the surface of why this happens. Today, we're diving deeper into one of the most powerful forces shaping your software architecture, Conway's Law. Most people know the basic idea. Organizations design systems that mirror their communication structure. But what they don't realize is how this plays out in practice, especially at scale. We'll explore real examples of how team boundaries become system boundaries, why your org chart might be sabotaging your architecture, and most importantly, how you can use Conway's Law to your advantage instead of fighting against it. Here's what I've learned after years of helping organizations modernize their systems. If you want to change your architecture, you often have to change your teams first. The technology follows the people, not the other way around. So David, let's talk about an uncomfortable topic, which is, when was the last time that you looked at your architecture and actually saw Conway's Law reflected in it?
Absolutely. Every single project I think I've ever worked on, you can see the people and their roles reflected in the design of the system. And it is frustrating and humbling, right? As you see that. But also, I try to learn from it, right? Because in the few times that I've had the opportunity to actually come back to the team or the leadership or whoever, they actually would listen to me, or I was in a position where they would listen to me, and really just like take a technical point of view, but swap it out for people, right? Respecting everyone and their roles and all that, of course.
Right.
It was actually a really good conversation, right? It was talking about how we need to design ourselves and our relationships around how we want our systems to work. So
give me an example of a reflection that you've realized, or you've kind of like an epiphany, looking at your architecture and be like, hey, I see Conway's Law here.
Yeah.
What's a good example?
One that comes to mind is holding an address, right?
Right.
So to hold an address, maybe your user is going to have an address attached to them. Maybe their organization that they're a part of is going to have an address attached to them. And then maybe like customers, that are somehow associated with that organization in the database is going to have an address on them as well, or an invoice that the customer has is going to have addresses on it. The thing is, I've talked about, depending on the size of the system, I've talked about quite a few different domains right there.
Right.
Right? But in my case, everybody had a different idea of the structure of an address and what it should be, right? Some were thinking internationalization, some were not, right? Some didn't have the time to think about that and just said, hey, this thing's going to be in the US, so you're going to get address 1, line 2, zip, city, state,
Right.
and that's it. Well, nobody else knows outside of US, nobody else has states necessarily, right? Or the 50 or so states, right? It's not necessarily a zip code, it's a postal code, right? It's things like that where everybody needs to be sharing maybe the same address or have access to the same address, but they classify it in different ways. And so each team ended up overcoming the boundaries by more or less rigging it up, honestly, in code. They just ended up creating like a parser, address parser, and said, whenever we get an address from this domain, we got to do a little work to it, right? Before we're going to do something.
This is your if-else statements.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, when the product started out in the United States and it got popular, And so they wanted to take it to a few other countries, offer it to a few other countries. In doing the language interpretation and everything, right, for the UX, we ran into this ridiculous address problem, right? And when I look back and reflected on it and said, like, how did we get here? All the people and their roles lined up perfectly to how we got there.
Right. Conway's Law.
Conway's Law. Yeah. So that was a good example of, for me, of just kind of having that moment where it's like, I've heard a lot of people talking about this, but I really had a moment where I'm like, we totally fell into this, and no one ever saw it coming, right? It was people. We all had our jobs. We all had, hey, build this feature, build this domain, whatever it was, get this done. We were all doing our jobs.
Right.
But then when we came back together to put it all into one product, we ran into these things.
So let's dive deeper into what you kind of identified there. So we got teams. Potentially those teams are in silos. Now you have an integration problem, sounds like. So now teams build these things differently, or the use of this, I'm going to say, domain knowledge, shaped differently based on what the teams are doing. So now you have boundary context, it sounds like. What was integration like?
Yeah.
Were the teams talking? Were the teams collaborating? What was that like?
It was an uncomfortable moment. It really was, because, when each team was doing development, they were given quite a bit of leeway in terms of how much infrastructure they could use and that sort of thing, which was nice. So everybody developed something that was nice and could do what they needed it to do. They were in their own environments, obviously locally developing to get it going, and then they brought it up to a kind of shared team environment. I believe everybody was sharing a Docker Compose. So still running it locally, but everybody was sharing the same Docker Compose, so kind of the same infrastructure loosely, right? Sharing the same images at least. Then when the time came where everything's ready to be put together, then they created a, let's call it a staging environment, right? And the staging environment was the first moment when everything came together as one. And you're saying, okay, well, whomever put this whole idea together and designed the product overall, I sure hope they did their homework.
Right.
Because we've all been off working on our own thing, and now we're going to bring it back and put it together. And like, everybody shared their, contracts, right? Their APIs and how, you want to look this up, you want to look an invoice up, here's your ins, here's your outs for getting an invoice, or you want to search customers or search organization settings, here's your ins, here's your outs in our API to do that. So all of that was reasonably together. It's just everything kind of coming together and all the information actually flowing as one product. It was an uncomfortable moment.
So would you say that the challenge was it wasn't communicated across teams correctly, or do you think it was something else?
I think, first of all, everybody was running fast. I think everybody was running pretty hard to get it done. Obviously, the business is going to give us aggressive deadlines because that's what the business does. Everybody was running pretty hard to get it done. Also, everybody was trying to follow good principles, things like, creating an MVP, right? Fast iterations, agile programming, things like that. Like, they were trying to follow those things. They were trying to do good.
Right.
But overall, it really just, it just didn't line up, right? It was just each were individual thoughts that really weren't like a part of the big picture,
So it sounds like where you're identifying there were silos between the teams.
Yeah. And what you use the word silo, and I think that's the right word to use, but I kind of check myself there and say, like, the difference between a silo and a domain.
Right.
Right. And those are different things.
How so?
Well, I think the silo to me is more of a humanistic bit, right? Where the domain is more of a programmatic logic, I guess. Silos, I think, come with a very negative connotation for it. And in a lot of respects, it is. But I have to respect that silos are just how we work, right? We're humans.
Right.
The greatest software in the world was created by a human.
Right.
In the end.
Even AI.
Even AI, right?
Right.
As great and awesome as AI may be to write that code, a human at some point had to train the AI to be able to do that, or make the model to be able to do that, right? To write that code. So inevitably, you're going to have humanistic characteristics, if that's right. You're going to have those in the code, right? You're going to have those in the design for it. So that's why, like, silo and domain for me, I feel like I have to say that there is a distinction between the two, but they both exist together.
I mean, you're talking about there's a human factor that's probably driving your architecture. So a human scope is actually very interesting. Like, I always have a theory. My theory is our ability to innovate is huge. Actually, I would argue far exceeds AI today. However, the amount of information we could keep hold of at one time is sometimes the hindering part.
Right.
Right. So do you think that is playing a role in this? Do you think that's the human factor that you're talking about?
I mean, humans have imagination, right?
100%.
AI, I'm sorry, I'm sure people are going to be mad about this, doesn't have imagination.
Right.
It knows what it's trained on. It knows what it knows, right?
Right.
But it can't go outside those bounds of what it's been trained on.
Right.
So I think the ability to think outside the box and have an imagination, I agree. I think humans are just always going to be better about that, right?
Right.
And so it's like in a developer human, they're going to want to write code because developers love it writing code, right? They're going to want to use the latest and greatest because they're developers, right? But they're going to be constrained by time, money, legacy, things that they have to integrate with or use, or are currently maintaining, own. They're going to be constrained to those things. So I think that the imagination is kind of put in a box, if you will.
Right. So sometimes we end up trying to solve that. So we can't keep context, the entire system as a context in our brains, or maybe in one team. Naturally, what you end up doing is creating services, shared services. Have you experienced that?
One of the, okay, we're going to go off on a little bit of tangent. I'm going to share a little personal with you. In code, and this will be in life too, that utilities class or that miscellaneous class or something like that, you're lying to yourself.
Right.
That utilities class, you may think those are utilities, and I appreciate that they are shared between, different functions or different classes in your domain, but there's a better way to do that. Right? And the tangent here is my wife and I have a monthly budget, right? That we've lived on a budget. I was raised by accountants, so we live on a monthly budget. We have forever. And for a long time, I would not let us have a categorization of miscellaneous because it drives me insane. Everything goes in there then. You can't have miscellaneous.
It's a catch-all bucket.
But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, these costs only happen one time, right? We're not going to have this cost again for whatever. Or it's just something that, we had to buy, but it's not going to be forever, and it's not going to be recurring, or it's, and so in that case, we're not going to give it a category because that's just too much, right? Because it's a category that's only going to get used once or twice in 5 years, right? So she made the case to me, and yes, we have a miscellaneous category. And yes, I use it too because it's so easy to do. Miscellaneous. I don't know where that goes. I don't know what it was. It was something from Target. Miscellaneous.
I'm not going to waste more time on that. I'm just going to put it all here. We're done. Let's move on.
And so that, creating those generic places to put code and put things, and then much less sharing them possibly across teams and all that, like it's so tempting to do that. And not doing that is so hard.
It is. And when you think about it from a perspective of why engineers my favorite, probably because it's a way to reduce coding. And what I mean by that is it could be a way that we want to do less typing. So if I'm going to,
yes,
right? So if I'm going to go ahead and really remove this utility, remove the miscellaneous, like how you described it, that means I have to stop and define it everywhere that it needs to go. So if I'm doing a budget, potentially, like if I want to balance my budget, then I want to make sure that it's not a total for miscellaneous. I need to make sure that this is totaling in the right places.
It feels so inefficient, and it's so hard to not do it,
Right.
Or to do it because it feels so inefficient to replicate things. Sorry, I'm going to give you one more.
Yeah, keep going. I like where you're going there.
And that is when I got into one thing about databasing. For some reason, I love databasing, and I love writing code, that interacts with a store and all that kind of stuff. But one of the fundamental things, I don't think anyone ever taught me this, I just did it, was you never replicate data, right?
Third normal form.
And so it's just something you don't do. And that definitely either carried into or was a part of my thinking in code. You don't replicate code. In fact, my linting in my IDE yells at me when it finds very similar code in other files and things.
That bugs me, actually.
I know.
They start to complain the moment it finds one other replication.
Yeah.
So what happened to the rule of if you see this 3 or 4 times, then complain? Right now, it just complains if it's just one duplication.
And so we'll come back to Conway's law. Coming back to thinking about the address. So each domain, if they have the definition or if they have to hold address information, they're going to have a definition of address, right? They're going to offer to others an address contract, right, for it. So someone naturally is going to, that's kind of seen the holistic system is going to say, oh, we need a shared address service or library, right?
We need uniqueness and one record to represent it, right?
And
Makes
so
sense.
everybody's going to share the same address contract definition. And then suddenly it goes into another class and another class. And you're right back to the monolith, right? Because we can't do anything until this library is updated. But this library is shared between other 5 services who don't have any plans to do any sort of updating or changing anytime soon.
Right. So let's kind of bring back a topic that we talked about in the last episode, which was around domain-driven design. How we talked about bounding context was so important. Would you say when you have a bounded context, by definition, we're talking about a context? And that by more explicit definition, we're saying that this address thing that sounds simple may be represented differently across different contexts. Maybe, right? Like, for example, what do we mean by that? We mean that in some parts, we're going to say, as a marketing team, I care about David's email. And I want all the variations of his email, right? We're talking about something simple, and it could be applied to address as well. But that changes in definition because my context changed.
Right.
So what happens when you have a shared service? What happens when you're trying to be dry? You're trying to not duplicate information. Are you then indirectly forcing all the different domains to change to adhere to a single structure?
Yep. And that, what I'm thinking cross-team communication here, right?
Right.
My thoughts are just going there about how poor cross-team communication really, really makes its way into the system. And I think the address is a good example of that, right? Is the answer to have a shared library between all the different services? No, right? That's going to create a whole nother box of problems for you. Is the answer for each service to have its own definition of address? I think yes. But that comes with the caveat of good communication between teams, right? If everybody meets on day one and day zero and says, this is what we're going to build. I want you to do this, you to do this, and you to do this. And then everybody says, go off and do those things. Right. And 6 months later, they come back and say, okay, I built that. And they have their own definition of everything. Right. There is no communication along the way. And I'm being a bit dramatic, I know. But along the way, the teams have to constantly check in with each other because you're going to see those things. Constant team communication is going to overcome those things and say, we got to figure this out.
Well, how do you innovate when so much has been built? That's, I think, is probably the heart of the Conway's problem. So going back to our opener, it's going back to your team to find better solutions.
Right.
And I think that's key. That's really important.
I smell a reorg.
It might have to be, right? But technically, it doesn't have to be a complete reorg. Right?
You know what? You're right. Reorgs usually have a very negative connotation about layoffs and someone losing their job. Right. And it doesn't have to be that. It could just be that because, as we talked about last time, I'm always going to point my finger at leadership. I'm always going to do it. Right. Yes, there are bad developers. Yes, there are people with malicious intentions, but they're very far and few between.
We'll make those as an isolated case or maybe an exception. Yeah.
But I'm always going to point my finger back to the leader having focus and direction, right? And the better that they can do that. And the thing is, it's going to change. So if that changes, what I think about, this is going to be random, but what I think about is a ship sailing. I've never sailed a ship before, so let me be clear about that. I saw it on TV.
Whatever
once.
you say, I'm gonna agree.
A ship going in a certain direction, sailing, is going to have the wind, is going to have focus, right? This is the way the wind is blowing. This is the direction that we want to go. Let's go that way. If the captain decides that this is not where we want to go, though, this isn't taking us to our destination, I need to change that, then you're going to have to change everything on the boat. The sails are going to have to change. I know there's somebody that knows sailing out there but things are going to have to change. It just trickles down, right? That direction or misdirection or structure that has been provided or not provided, it's going to trickle down. And when you're writing the software, if you're given some feature or something and you say you need to make this, if you're not given much direction about it, or you're given very tight bounds to say, make this, but it's like, well, to make this, I need to connect over here and I need to do this. Don't worry about that. We don't know about that. Make this. Then you're going to do everything that you can to make it work. You're going to end up making bad decisions, or you're going to end up doing a design that you're not proud of, but you had to do because that's just what you were given.
You're kind of getting into this is beyond just technology solutions.
Very much. Honestly, most of the conversations that I have with clients and friends, the conversation that they're expecting from me is going to be a technical one. And yeah, I can talk to you about inline caches and side caches and things like that, and all those intricacies. But when it comes down to it, the conversation you're going to get from me is who are the people, right? What are their skill sets? What are their roles? Are they a part of a monarchy? Do I sense monarchies, right? Do I sense that in the conversation? Do I sense in the organization as I'm talking to you or I'm talking to another leader, do I sense that there is a disconnect here because they're both jockeying for the same VP position, right? Or things like that. It's the human side of it. And the human side of it, when you're writing software, influences everything.
Let's not repeat the scenario of teams driving the technical solution or the domains, but then figure out the business, figure out the user, figure out the domains, and then align the teams to it. You probably don't have to switch or swap teams, but like you said, it's the manager given direction. So it does come back to a manager given direction. But it sounds like also what you're saying is maybe a little bit higher up, is that if we had a clear vision alignment around what is the process, what is the boundary context.
It was either you or one of our colleagues years ago. You taught me this, to watch out for this. I'm giving this to you. I don't remember if it was, but
It's on record.
and that is during the event storming session,
Right.
just watch. I have had the opportunity to sit through multi-day sessions that involved different teams, right? And just watch. And the human side of that, if you stop looking beyond the stickies and you start like saying, well, why did they put on there? Why did they put that up there? Where did they put that on the board? How do they react when we consolidate these things down and we say this one doesn't matter as much? When those things happen, watch.
Right.
Watch the people, and you'll begin to understand, how bad those monarchies are.
Right. And this is probably like going back to making Conway's law work for you, right? Versus working against you.
Yeah, we have put a very negative kind of connotation to it, haven't we?
We have. So like maybe kind of course correcting a little bit that negative connotation. So how can you make Conway's law work for you? Like what are some ideas can we give to our viewers and just kind of like implant different thoughts in our viewers?
For me, that is very simple. Create an organization with focus and direction, right? Very hard to do, but I'm not going to actually try to, implement or try to be aware of Conway's law, right? I'm not going to try to drive everyone to, this is just going to be a natural thing that happens. If I organize the people in a good way that's following the same direction, right? And I provide good leadership to them, Conway's law is going to be a great thing because the software, the systems that are created are going to reflect this organization. They're going to reflect all the good ideas and the direction that I gave all those folks initially, right? So it can be a very, very good thing.
I like where you're going with this. So you're saying that if we organize right and we take advantage of Conway's law, we know what happens with Conway's law. But if that was organized correctly, let Conway's law take effect.
Yeah.
But the outcomes
It'll be good.
Desired is the ideal outcome that we want to get to.
Yep.
I like that. I like where you're going there. So I guess the takeaway from today's session is that Conway's law is not a negative thought, but it does require us to reconsider the problem that we're solving. So this will take you back to rethinking the business, how they process, what their bounds are, what their domains are, what their boundary contexts are.
Yep.
And then structure in that order so you could get the right results.
I think Conway's law is neither positive or negative. It's an effect. And it's going to happen either way because we're humans, right? And so I think it could be that effect can be very powerful and very positive if you have the right direction and focus.
I agree. Which brings us to our next episode, the stack, the plan, and the platform. We'll explore how a modern delivery stack approach, combined with blueprint methodology, can provide a unified framework that works with human behavior instead of against it. We'll also be honest about what this combination can't solve because no amount of good tooling will fix fundamental organizational dysfunctions. Thanks for listening to Go Into Production. If you haven't, please consider subscribing to our podcast. I'm Wael Rabadi, and we'll see you next time.